So what is innovation? I don't know about you, but oftentimes I get limited to that definition of technology. I think about the introduction of the smartphone or a Fitbit, maybe even those handy tablets that we've all gotten so addicted to. But innovation doesn't have to be limited to technology. Generally, what it refers to is creating a more effective process or product or idea that will increase the likelihood of some sort of business success. So organizations innovate by really creating more efficient work processes and by having better productivity and performance. So it's a process really of translating that idea somebody might have or a need for a change into something that creates value to your end customer. Now, for those of you in the for-profit world, value often then translates into money. It doesn't have to, though. In a government sector, maybe it's being a good fiscal steward of our citizenship's tax dollars. Or in the nonprofit world, it's oftentimes about how are we more efficient about the services and how do we get more out of those donor dollars. So innovation doesn't always have to be tied back to some sort of profit. It can simply be tied back to how do we do what we do better.
Now, what does it include? Innovation often includes the application of an idea, information, initiative, and how do we take those and translate those into some sort of new process that we now are going to apply across the organization. That application process can be a little scary. And here's one of probably now the most important elements as we think about innovation. Innovation, practically by definition, involves some sort of risk. None of us know the future. And that's oftentimes one of the biggest barriers to implementing any sort of innovative change, the fear of failure. You can't have a good environment really that fosters an innovative mindset without the freedom to fail. There's got to be that safety net. What is that Thomas Edison quote of, he didn't fail at making the light bulb 99 times, he simply found 99 ways not to make the light bulb. So there's always those learning elements that we get from innovation as well.
So as you think about maybe even your application project, when we're thinking about innovation, it really begins to tap back into that organizational stewardship. So strategic leaders and organizational stewards aren't just creating change and innovating for change and innovation's sake. It really is, how does this now tie back to the organization's vision, its mission, its values? And one of the biggest elements that you'll find that you're managing over the course of your project isn't necessarily the logistics, but how it's impacting your organizational culture. Innovation pushes at that basic underlying assumption that we talked about earlier. This isn't the way we've always done things. So as you reflect on your projects, as you reflect on innovation, remember it's not just as simple as introducing a new technology. So how is it that any of these organizational initiatives or innovations that we're going to try to put out there, how is it that they're actually adopted in an organizational culture? Well, there's some science behind that. Malcolm Gladwell refers to it as the tipping point. We're going to take a look at a different theory, one positioned by Everett Rogers in the early 1960s in his book Diffusion of Innovation. It's currently in its 5th edition. It's a very popular model of how we take a look at how a change distributes across a population and how some sort of innovation is adopted. So whether it's those technologies we were talking about earlier or a process, an idea, a system. So according to Rogers, we move through a particular curve, and that curve is represented by different kinds of personalities within an organizational culture around some sort of initiative or change. So at the front end, you have innovators, people who like to try out new things and bring in those new technologies to an organization. That makes up about 2.5% of an organization's population. From there, you get the early adopters. I want the newest and latest and greatest. I didn't necessarily create the iPhone, but I want one of the first ones. According to Everett Rogers, that make up about 13.5% of an organization's population. From there, you have the folks of, I don't necessarily need to be the first adopter. I want to see that it's working, but I want to get on that wagon pretty soon. That's the early majority. Makes up about 34% of an organization's population. From there, once a majority has begun to pick it up, the rest of us begin to say, all right, seems like it's tried and true. I'll give it a shot as well. About another 34% of an organization's population. And then finally, you get the laggards. That's about 16%. I don't want it, you can't make me use it. I'll be a little honest with you, that's how I was with a cell phone. I didn't get my first cell phone until 2006. I won't bore you with the story, but I definitely fell into the topic of laggards around cell phones. So as we think about this, at one element, it looks kind of easy. Now you might be noticing there was a small portion here that I skipped, and that's referred to as the chasm. This is, going back to Malcolm Gladwell, this is that variation between trying something out and creating the tipping point. According to Rogers, what we have to do is we have to be able to cross the chasm. Any innovation, whether it's a technology, whether it's an idea, a new process, if I want to get it widely adopted across the organization, things begin to shift. Now, one shift is the idea of how we message some sort of innovation that we're trying to get adopted across a population. Early on, from a marketing point of view, we push scarcity. We're only making so many iPhones for a limited time. That really works for the innovators and the early adopters. However, once we begin to get further along, what we really creates more influence is a concept called social proof. See here, everybody else is doing it too. Look how many other people have tablets. Look how many other people have the new Surface Pro. So it's not anymore about scarcity, you're one of a unique few. It's no, you want to be part of the larger organization and group. So the messaging begins to change. As we think about how to cross the chasm, there are 5 factors that we have to keep in mind. The first factor is what is the relative advantage people are going to experience as a function of this innovation. If we're moving to a new document management platform, how will this make my life better versus the old platform? So relative advantage, first point that'll help us cross this chasm. Second point is it compatible with any sort of existing values and practices? Is it simple to use, or is it much more complex? Is there a chance to try it out? The technical term is trialability. Do I have to commit to it right out of the gate? And then finally, are there observable results? All of these become factors of, will some sort of innovation be adopted from here, the early adopters, over to the early majority? Let me give you a few examples of things in the past of where we might see this adoption of innovation play out. One example is certainly the cell phone. We can go back to the early 80s, remember the big brick. We had the innovators, the early adopters, really proud of carrying around that big brick. As we begin to get into the late 1990s, the flip phone, suddenly it's looking a lot more like Star Trek. Wow, we're getting a little bit more of this early majority. But what were some of these, maybe these bigger chasm elements that had to get crossed for really the full early majority to capture it? Coverage was a big issue. Dead spots, price, roaming charges. As those elements all got managed within the field of telecommunications, suddenly everybody needed a cell phone. So much so that even having a landline has become a bit of an issue for many people. Maybe you've just dropped it off. Now, another example of a technology that didn't pick up, the HD DVD player. You might not even remember what that is. It came out right around the same time as a Blu-ray. So new technology past VCR tapes, got these little discs. We're going to try it out. Two technologies trying to compete in the marketplace. Only one survived, and that was Blu-ray. Now, both relatively easier to use, can communicate lots of easy advantage around moving from a better viewing experience. Both of them were about the same price point. Trialability, that was a challenge for both of them. Can you buy a piece of equipment, not like it, and turn it back? Sometimes stores have a problem with that. Observable results. If you're a moviephile and you really like watching movies at home, you might have seen some observable results. So now, anybody know? Can you think about why one survived and the other didn't? Well, I'll tell you the answer to that. Walmart. As Walmart has become the answer for very many things, Walmart decided they were going to exclusively carry Blu-ray. Within a few short months, HD DVD was dead. So, whole other factor, outside contributing environmental circumstances. So while we have our earlier 5 factors of what helps us cross the chasm, we have to make sure to never forget what's going on in the larger environment as well. So as we wrap up taking a look at innovation, one last question. How many of you have heard of disruptive innovation? It's a term that's come into popularity over the past 10, 15 years. It's actually originated by a gentleman by the name of Clayton Christensen back in 1995. So what is a disruptive innovation? How's it different than innovation in general? Well, disruptive innovation is typically an innovation that creates a whole new market, creates a whole new value network. It eventually disrupts the existing market and might even push out the big players that are currently dominating and push them off to the sidelines. So, a couple examples for you. Digital cameras. How many of you own a digital camera? Well, you were part of disruptive innovation. That significantly impacted Kodak, right? Prior to that, the world of film production, creation, whole market there of purchasing film. Remember those little canisters? Versus now digital and storing everything on digital. How camera technology worked completely changed, and a number of the big players, some of them disappeared, others of them re-geared and came back to life. Another example we can think about, currently going on for many people, is streaming video. You know, the day of going to the video store, picking up the VHS tape. Well, Netflix, they changed a lot of that. Netflix practically killed Blockbuster, and now getting the DVD through the mail. But even now Netflix has had to adapt to that new innovation of streaming video. They went through some of their own challenges of you don't even have to have the physical product now. We can just have a subscription to Amazon or Hulu, and now maybe even Netflix with its own service. So oftentimes a market can adapt to it, but it completely changes how people do business. Now, another way to look at disruptive innovation is oftentimes a disruptive innovation allows people who hadn't used to be able to have access to the product or service to be able to dive in and have access. So an example for you around that is online trading. So who used to be able to do trading in the stock market? Well, that's only people with a lot of money and who know a stockbroker and who'll manage all of that for you. In the world of e-trade and online trading, completely disrupted a lot of the trading market. Or the investing market, Charles Schwab. They stopped looking at just the big investor and became more about the average person like you and me, and they changed up how the investing market really works. So as you think about any of your own workplace application projects, some of the innovations you might come up with could be highly disruptive. Does it completely change how things are done? And do old items need to be cycled out in order to create space for new?